Oh, now
Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Today is the 6th of Tishrei. I'm still gonna have to get used to saying the word Tishrei. I keep on wanting to say like of or something, but that's obviously a little bit off. Today is the 12th, September 12th, Sunday. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, we are studying Maseches Shabbos, chapter 7. We're at the tail end. We're getting towards the end of Maseches Shabbos, chapter 7, rather. We still got a way to go till the end of Maseches Shabbos. And so we just finished the Mishnah, and we're ready to talk about carrying and the measurement of carrying. How does it fall in over here? Because you'll see it can be considered a klal, another important general principle, a klal that's appropriate for Hilchos Shabbos. Again, here now we'll be talking a little bit about the volume, the measurement of items that are carried on Shabbos. Before we go on, just to finish up on Friday, we ended off with an excerpt that I found online from Aldaf, but I don't know the source, and apparently there's some researchers from Denmark that found that a certain part, again, this is all gibberish or science to me, but apparently there's a certain aspect of measurement of light that's not the professor's on, so he'll help us set us straight. So it's, in a sense, these professors were studying indigo and tcheles. I don't think it had to do with our interest in tcheles for Jewish purposes, but somehow they mentioned that a certain measurement of the lights ends up being something in the 613 measurement. Our professor, however, made a very, very good point on the WhatsApp group, which is that ultimately all of this, these kinds of measurements are man-made and relatively new. So if it doesn't work out, we shouldn't be utterly disappointed. If it works out, it's cute, it's nice, but of course that's not, these cutesy possible things should not make or break our relationship with Torah Mitzvot. It's always just a cute cherry on top if it works. And if it doesn't work, I mean, it's a shame that people find the need to sometimes embellish or make things up, but suffice it to say, it was interesting enough to share, and I want to thank everyone for the follow-up conversation in the WhatsApp chats. And
possible the frequency is though the 613 terahertz. But when the guy he said it was the wavelength, and he showed his thing, and I was, like I said, I was doing spectroscopy, so I just he gave me the sample and I measured it. It was for something.
So Mark, this is your space. I certainly am not going to weigh in with an authoritative manner on this subject, but I thought that was interesting. But anyways, we'll pivot now to a new Mishnah, a new topic. I want to thank everyone for being here today. We are continuing to daven for the speedy healing for all of Am Yisrael, all those that are in need. We're going to mention Leah Basrita for a complete and speedy recovery. I also want to mention today is the 6th of Tishrei, and that happens to be the yahrzeit of the mother of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, for a Chabadnik, that's interesting. Why should that be interesting for anybody else? So I just want to share an interesting tidbit, and then we'll jump into the Gemara. One of the areas in Jewish thought that the Rebbe really is known to have kind of created his own mahalech. Again, we're talking about the Rebbe who dedicated his life with Ahavas Yisrael and teaching of Chassidus. But in addition to that, the Rebbe is well known for his derech in studying Rashi on the Chumash. And any scholar who today chooses to explore, study Rashi with any kind of seriousness cannot avoid the Rebbe's scholarship and commentary on the matter. And it became one of the areas that the Rebbe would discuss practically every single Farbrengen. So at times, the Rebbe would Farbrengen at least once, every Shabbos Farbrengen. So at least once a month for sure, the Rebbe would have a Farbrengen on Shabbos. Other times, there was a Farbrengen every Shabbos. The Rebbe would always, or almost always, weigh in on a Rashi and the Chumash. And he had different periods of time. He had different areas of Rashi that he would analyze. He had certain klolim that he developed, certain principles that he developed. And so that all started as a tribute to his mother. Following her passing in 1964 in Tuf Shin Chaf Hey, that's 5725, but it was 1964. He began right after Tishrei. She passed away in Vav Tishrei, I think on Shabbos Parshas Noach. He began this formula for an entire year, and then it became one of the hallmarks, one of the things that were known about the Rebbe scholarship, and a little bit of an obscure space. There are other commentaries earlier, and so that all started as a result of this day, as a tribute to his mother. And so anyways, that's an interesting tidbit that people may not know. So now I'll share the screen, and let's get down to our Gemara. Here we go. And you may recall, excuse me, Tosfos in analyzing why it's described as a klal gadol, and part of the maybe the Gemara part of the discussion referenced the next Mishnah that has other klals. This is not a klal gadol, so we wanted to know what makes a klal, what makes a rule, a big rule, a small rule. Let's not revisit that now, but suffice it to say, here is another klal, another rule that we're going to explore in the subject of Shabbos. Oid klal acher amr. Here is another principle. Good to know. Take a look. Kol hakosher lihatzniya. Anything that is something that people would want to preserve, to save, to keep around. Umatzniyin kimoyu, and it has the minimum volume. That is something that you would store away, you would keep. V'hoisiya b'Shabbos, and you carried it on Shabbos. Chayev chatos olav. That is a volume that's considered carrying, and therefore a person would have to bring a sin offering, because we know that one of the malachis on Shabbos is to remove something from one domain to another, as we discussed at the very opening of the Mishnah. What I want to do here, I want to be very careful. I want to read exactly the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz, and then we'll take a look at exactly the words of Rashi, just to get a picture of what's going on over here. So Rabbi Steinsaltz says the principle is anything fit to store, in the sense that it is large enough to make it worthwhile to store for future use. Something that's, again, you don't put away a Cheerio, I don't think, unless you're a squirrel or a 3-year-old who wants to make the parents have a hard time getting ready for Pesach. But otherwise, you don't put away a Cheerio. You don't put away a kernel of corn. And you don't put away a little pinch of coffee that's not enough to make a cup of coffee. So anything that's enough, it's a chashuv amount, that it'll be of significance, that's considered a volume worth carrying, and therefore it is considered carrying.
Rabbi,
yes.
Isn't it subjective? What's worth storing for one person is not the same for another?
We'll discuss that. There are certain standards, but it is also subjective, and indeed we'll discuss that in short order. The Gemara is going to discuss that, so very, very good point. Yes.
Also, is an issue of an aggregate. For instance, when you said the pinch of coffee, one pinch of coffee is not enough, but you put away, if you have leftover from a few bags, in the aggregate, it would be enough.
Good point, good point. So it seems like there's a standard, but that's a good point. Sometimes a lot of little measurements, in other words, if the kids have a habit of saving Cheerios, if you collect them from all over the house, you might have a whole bowl of cereal. So let's see. So again, kol hakosher latzniya, something that's worth saving. It's a thing people want to have. And it's the volume worth saving. It's the kind of amount that a person would put away. Okay, no, we're looking at Rabbi Steinsaltz. So anything fit to store. So he says that it's large enough, and it's the kind of thing people store, and you carry it out in a way that's prohibited on Shabbos, so you have to bring a chatzis. And now the Mishnah says the opposite. Something that is not fit to be stored away, and it's not the kind of thing people store, and that's what you carried. Here, Rebel, here is your point. So if it's a kind of volume that's really not interesting for people, and you carried it, the only person that would be liable for carrying such a volume is the person that chose subjectively to find it worthwhile. So we can suppose, and the next Mishnah is going to give us actual measurements but we can imagine at least there's some kind of volume that's a standard. And that one Cheerio should not be, most likely, we can all agree, is not that standard. But what about the person that really wants that one Cheerio? Maybe he needs to do a science project, I don't know. He wants to measure, maybe he wants to carve on his Cheerio, Harayat Mikudeshesli, I don't know. That'd be a pretty crazy thing to do. But if the person wants it, right, today there's such a thing as micro, I don't know. So anyways, the person that wants it, they are chayiv. Rebero, this is your subjective point. But anyone else who carries it, if they're not interested in carrying it, it doesn't count. So a little lint in your pocket, although you shouldn't have it in your pocket, that's not going to be, you don't have to bring a chatas if there's a little lint, which you don't really want, and it's a very small amount. I think that we can safe to say that you would not be chayiv on that. Let's read the rest of Rabbi Steinsaltz, and then I want to go to Rashi. Anything not fit to store, and people typically do not store items like it. I suppose we could say the lint in your pocket. People don't put that away, I don't think. Since it's too insignificant to warrant storage, it's very small, very little. One who carried it out, only the one who stores it is liable. If you're a person that actually would store such a thing, then you're chayiv. But if you actually don't have a value, you don't have your subjective interest in that item, then there's no chiyuv. Let's read the Rabbi Steinsaltz commentary. Then we'll see Rashi. By storing the item, one indicates that the item is significant to him, even though it is not significant for the typical person. So here we might say a scientist who's looking to collect samples of substances, or someone that has a mishagas, they might be liable because they actually want to transport it, but no one else. Therefore, he alone is liable for carrying out into a public domain. So generally speaking, Rebero, there is, at the very least, subjectively, you could be chayiv if you are interested, but you have to actually be interested in it to be chayiv. Otherwise, you are off them. This is just Mishnah with Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation and comment.
It's way too general for, and maybe the Talmud will discuss.
It will.
Let's say something was insignificant to you, and then when you find it, you say, "Oh, I could use it for something." Are you retroactively chayiv? It's a lot of loose points here. Let's see where the Talmud will go.
Oh, let's see where the beautiful. Thank you, Rebero. But so far, just for the record, you've been on target, so don't stop. Let's see Rashi. A kind of thing that people like to keep around. You know, there are certain critters that collect different things for different reasons, for a nest or who knows what. But right now we're talking about human beings for the most part, right? So it has to be something interesting. I'm sorry?
How many persons the Mishnah is talking about? Is it the situation when one stores and then changes his mind and takes it out? Or is it the situation when one stores and another person takes it out?
I don't think we're talking about the same item. We're talking about a metric to determine if a person is actually interested.
No, I don't mean the metrics. I mean the people. The Mishnah says that one person stores something, and then this item is taken out. Who takes this item?
So, Professor, you're
or it is a different person. I mean the situation when one puts something aside and another person took it out in the public domain.
So let me answer your question, and then let me tell you, you're getting at something important. The answer is we're technically talking about two people each carrying a Cheerio. One guy that has no interest in the Cheerio, and he's not chayiv, and the person that has a Cheerio collection, or I don't know, he's chayiv. So the guy who stores this kind of thing is chayiv, the guy who doesn't is not chayiv. So we're essentially, we're shining the spotlight on the person that is interested, but we're teaching of two people, an interested and a disinterested. Now, where your comment is very important, and we'll get to it soon, is what if the item is insignificant to me, but it's significant to you and you ask me to carry it? That's what you were getting at, right? So we'll get to that. So right now we're talking about it simple. They're not talking to each other. Each one is carrying it for their own purposes. Or one has a purpose, one doesn't. So Rabbi Menachem, perhaps we might say that most people don't save a few grains of coffee if it's not enough to make a cup of coffee. But someone else who maybe grew up in listen, we're Jewish people, and many of us have ancestors or relatives or friends that lived in times of great scarcity. Maybe some of us lived ourselves through moments of great scarcity. And so therefore we don't take for granted God's gift of even a few grains of coffee. And so maybe that an individual has the minhag of saving the few spillover grains of coffee and they collect them. So such an individual, a mashal, would be chayiv because they are matzniya. They do save it. But those who are spoiled and haven't been impacted or clued in about the potential for great scarcity. So for them, that's not something that they would store. It's not significant to them, and therefore they're carrying it. Does not have any weight. Reb Beryl, please.
The big problem here is with Rav Steinsaltz using the word typically, because if you take the coffee thing, normally you would throw it out, but all of a sudden you see you have no coffee left. Oh, let me save it. At least I'll have something. So typically is a real opening of a window.
So here's what, without going too far, because I know there are sciences that deal with this. Although everyone is unique, generally we can have some kind of a consensus that there are generalized standards. Generally, we would expect a person to do X or to value X and not to value. So it's not impossible, although it gets difficult when we get down to the how many kernels of instant coffee is considered a teaspoon. Is it a heaping spoon? And is that 63 kernels of coffee, grains of coffee? Is it 27? But we could create generalized. By the way, I'm totally making this thing about the coffee. For all we know, the Mishnah here is not even talking about one cup. Maybe a person doesn't store one spoon of coffee. They only store a canister with multiple cups of coffee. I'm just using that as an example. We could appreciate what someone might not want to store and what someone might have an individual desire to store. Again, I want to remind everyone you may be muted, but if you want to say something, we want to hear your voice. So please be sure to unmute so we can learn from you. Let's see, Rashi. Was that anyone else want to make a comment, Dr. Hammer? You were going to say something?
No, I was just thinking. I know we're both big coffee drinkers, but we have to remind ourselves that some people like tea, and the example is probably easier with people with a tea bag who use their tea bag and put it in their pocket. So anyway.
That's a good point. And also, it's easier to measure a standardized unit of tea if it's in a tea bag than a standard unit of coffee where we might have a.
Right.
Let's see Rashi. So Rashi explains, the first thing is, it's the kind of thing people use. This volume. It has the volume that a person would consider kedai, worthy to store. Then Rashi, towards the end of our Mishnah, that says that there is a certain value to this person's subjective interest. Only a person who actually stores the extra coffee, they are chayiv for carrying it. If a person, through their behavior, indicates that they are interested in this very small amount of stuff, or they decide that they're interested in something that humans don't typically desire. And he hid it, stores it. Now when he transfers it elsewhere, he is chayiv. If he's then going to take it out of the storage space. So this is answering more directly the professor's question. How many people? Rashi's saying it's talking about two people. But another person would not be chayiv for this item, either the same item or an item like it. Because to the person who doesn't value the item, they have no interest in transporting it. If you have no interest in transporting it, then it's not considered carrying, because the issue isn't carrying something, it's carrying something of significance that you actually desire to carry. And this is the next Mishnah. On one hand, it seems pretty straightforward, but of course it brings up many questions.
Sorry.
Yes, Rabbi.
Sorry, Rabbi, but it's so interesting. I don't want to let it go. So is the Avera storing it? Let's say the guy took it and he realizes that the quantity is too much and never touches it again. Is he chayiv or something?
There's no Avera for having an idiosyncratic manner or interest in preserving stuff. That's not a sin. Maybe you actually have an industry that has a need for those things. Or maybe you'd rather not go to the store, so you could collect everyone's leftover coffee and you could save the because there are habitats in Brazil that are impacted by coffee, and so for you to save the coffee, you're saving so that's not a sin, that's not a crime. It might even be a beautiful act of sensitivity, and it could be a mitzvah for all I know. But what you have done is you've designated through your actions, you've made that, not that you've made it, it is significant to you. And if it's significant to you, you're carrying something that you want, that you value. And therefore you because you value it, it's considered that you've carried it. So there is no crime. There's no criticism. This is a safe space. We are certainly not going to look down at anyone that has an atypical treatment of their stuff. Maybe Dr. Hammer and Dr. Pasternak would tell us when it gets into the, into an unhealthy space. But as far as this year is concerned, there's no judgment. It's not a crime. And as far as the Torah is concerned, it's not a crime for sure. But it would render the item significant, and therefore, if you carry it, it would be considered carrying. Did I answer the question, Beryl?
Not directly.
Okay, so help me out. Maybe I didn't understand the question.
Is it significant whether the person ever uses that item or not? If he realizes that he shouldn't have done it and says, "Okay, I won't use it," it's not considered stored, or it is?
You're asking if Chas v'shalom a person carries outside of an Eruv the little bit of coffee that they saved because they wanted it, but then they realized, oh, I carried it, I don't want to carry it, so I'm going to throw it out. Does that render it now retroactively not something that you want to save? And I believe the answer is no. I believe we look at your. It would be a shoygeg. It would be an unintentional act, but that's a cover-up. That's attempting to retroactively engineer a reality that doesn't reflect what you were doing or intending to do when you carried it. So, as we know, kavana is an important matter, and I'm fairly certain, although I don't want to say 100% certain, I'm fairly certain that would be problematic. But I'm open to hearing another point, and I'm certainly open to seeing in Talmudic scholarship if there's someone disagrees with that.
Just a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
So you realize that you have this instant coffee in your pocket. I did it. So you should be taking it out on the spot and getting rid of it, not continuing on to shul, right? You should be removing it. So that presents other problems.
Yeah, so I believe we discussed, and it's been a little bit far off, so I don't remember if we discussed it or not. But ideally, you don't want to transfer something from one place to another. If you recall, there was an akira and hanacha, the act of uprooting and the act of placing down.
Right.
And so you have to be strategic, not only of if you're carrying it, but how you offload it. If I recall correctly, we discussed that the preferred way would be to either let it slip off of your person kilachar yad while you're moving, or maybe even more ideally to let it slip off onto a makom patur, some kind of area that's not, or a carmelist if you have no other choice, so you're not biyadayim placing it down on a rishus hayachid if you're coming from a rishus rabbim or vice versa. I believe we discussed it at the time, so it's okay. that this is an important question actually, because it could happen. It does happen, but I don't want to spend too much time because fear of inaccuracy, and also because we're not immediately discussing it. But that's an important matter to consider how you dispose of or how you offload. I think if you're close enough to your destination, you've never stopped, the ideal thing would be to, without stopping, going back to your original destination. So go back to your original rishus hayachid. Sometimes that's not possible, so then there are other proposed ideas as well.
Yeah, I think some of that might depend, if we get away from the example of coffee or tea, to examples of carrying a baseball card of one of your kids that's of value not to you but to your kid, or a small 1/16 carat diamond that landed up in your pocket because you got rid of the other stuff because you work in that industry, and now you realize that you have that diamond chip in your pocket. So I'm saying the question of getting rid of those two things may be a little different than just dropping the coffee on the way.
I do want to clarify one more thing. So far, we have discussed in the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to address this more, an item that's not valuable to most and making it valuable. We haven't talked about if one could devalue something that is on average interesting. So Dr. Hammer, on average, no matter the size, a little a little diamond in the pocket for most people would be significant, even though there might be someone who just bought that pink diamond, whatever, for, I don't know, $300 million, whatever it went for. And so this little speck worth only, $100 or $200 or $500 is not interesting to you. But we have to now discuss if we could break a standard. So until now, we've talked about upgrading an uninteresting item into being an interesting item. But our Gemara is going to get to answering those or addressing those issues. I just want to take a peek at the Pnei Yeshua, although we don't usually learn him, just because he has an interesting, or not interesting, he highlights something that I mentioned, and I want to just show you. From Rashi's commentary and from the Gemara, it would appear that's being explained. The high kosher lehatzniya, umatzniyan kemaisai. The word kosher lehatzniya, something fit to store because of its volume, the amount that you have. Umatzniyan kemaisai, and it's the general item that a person saves. Trey, mili, ninhu. These are two different criteria. It's coffee that human beings save, and it's the amount of coffee that people usually put away. A person would not be liable for a biblical prohibition until you have both factors. It has to be the kind of thing that human beings like to keep around. And then the Gemara is going to discuss later. It excludes items that people don't like to keep around. So if the item's uninteresting, even a large volume, you would be pater. And if something that is kept around, but it doesn't have the volume, that too would not be a problem. And then he has a question that maybe we'll revisit once we go to the Gemara. But I just wanted to point that out. It was likely obvious to you, but I just wanted to show you that it's a. And he has a question based on our next Gemara, so maybe we'll revisit it. All right, here's the Gemara. Kol hakosher latzniya. Remember when the Mishnah gives us these like total comments with like expression like total. Kol hakosher, anything. What's the kol? Just say davar hakosher latzniya. The kol is like for extra emphasis. What are we emphasizing? So the Gemara says kol hakosher latzniya, anything fit to store. Lafu kemai. What are we excluding? I'm sorry if what we're going to read next is a little unappetizing. Rav Papa said, what would be a kind of thing that people don't like to store? Lafuki damnida. People typically don't want to store menstrual blood. I mean, are there no other examples besides for this? I don't know, but that's his example. Mar Ukva had another kind of example. You'll see soon why it's not totally crazy. But Mar Ukva says, Lafuke Atzei Asher, to exclude Atzei Asher. What are Atzei Asher? So those that learned Gemara Avodah Zarah with us in our preceding iteration of Talmud study at Yeshiva night, back in the
day,
BC, before COVID. So Atzei Asherah, it's a kind of tree that was devoted to worship of Avodah Zarah, and it's, as we know, just like in general, Avodah Zarah items are asur b'hana. You're not allowed to have any kind of benefit from items that are immediately associated with Avodah Zarah. You might even recall when we were learning the Gemara, we had a whole question about selling chashkes that belong to another faith. Not to go back into that discussion, but just to trigger your memory. So Atzei Asherah, the wood of these trees, are entirely prohibited b'hana. You cannot sell it. You can't use it for firewood to keep you warm. It must be it's worth zero for a Jewish person in a Jewish world. So people don't store menstrual blood. They could, but they probably have no interest in doing so. And Atzei Asherah have no value. So are these two ideas exactly identical? So the Gemara says no. Manda Amar Dam Nida. If you say that Dam Nida is not something a person keeps around, Kol Shekain Atzei Asherah, certainly this would extend Atzei Asherah. There's no prohibition to keeping around Dam Nida. You just might want to see Dr. Hammer pretty fast and make sure, see if you need anything prescribed to help you out. Atzei Asherah are prohibited. So not only it's something that there's probably not much good use, but it's actually prohibited. Manda Amar Atzi Ashera, but the opinion that says the wood of the Ashera, but Damnida, maybe there is something you could do with that, which, namely, you might feed it to your cat. Apparently, there were cats that liked blood. I don't have a lot of experience with cats. Actually, I do have experience with cats when I lived in Eretz Yisrael, but we were certainly not doing things to encourage their presence. At least we didn't want them getting into the dormitory. I can tell you that much. But there were a lot of cats, and I'm sure if you've been to Eretz Yisrael, you know what I'm talking about. But apparently, one could technically feed it to their cat.
Rabbi,
Yes.
this part of the Talmud makes me feel much better because these examples are way out of there from where I was. So I'm comforted.
So the Gemara says, if you say that you can't do Atzei Shera, of course, you're not going to save. I'm sorry, no. If you keep Atzei Shera, you might yet think of keeping Danida because you could feed it to your cat. The Idach, but the opinion that says Atzei Shera, why wouldn't you keep it around? Because this blood, even though you might want to feed it, it could cause harm. Let's read the words without too much commentary, then we'll look at Rashi and see. Kivan, because, or being that, the cholsha gets weak, a person is not going to save it. What gets weak? Who gets weak? So this is actually a hard Gemara to decipher, especially because this is like not a familiar topic. But Rashi says, what does it mean? Why wouldn't the person keep around Damida? Maybe it's very good. You could save some money from buying pet food. So Rashi says, if a person were to feed human blood to a cat, they might like it, but naseh chalosh oisoy adam. This person could be caused to become weak.
I could see a situation where somebody would not necessarily store it for a long period of time, but keep it for a short period of time. If, for instance, a woman has a question sometimes whether it is nida or not nida, and she has to keep.
You're asking a very good question.
To have a shaila, and if it's over Shabbos, that she has to wait. So is that a question of does she have to store it or not store it?
You're asking a very good question. This is actually the question I believe the Ran asks, and he gives, I think, two answers. Number one might keep a garment that has some kind of staining, possibly. I don't want to get into that now, but they would not need to keep the volume of blood that's enough to feed to an animal. Alternatively, after all shilas are resolved, then is there any additional value? And from the Gemara, it's fairly clear that no. Now, I have a confession to make. I ran a Google search. I Googled, is menstrual blood toxic? I wanted to know if there's, because I'll tell you why I ran that Google search, which, by the way, was inconclusive or inclined to say it's not toxic. Because there's two ways to interpret this line in the Gemara. Either, as Rashi says, the human being would become harmed. And by the way, this wouldn't be only menstrual blood. You know, people used to do a lot of bloodletting. It was one of the only medical remedies or prevalent medical remedies. I'm fairly certain this was done at your local barber, right? Is that why we have that beautiful design, the pole outside, right? I believe barbers would cut hair and let blood, and maybe they did a few other things. So human blood, no matter how it was extracted, according to Rashi, if you feed it to an animal, it causes the individual to become weak. Now, this is certainly, I don't believe this is going to have any scientific substantiation, but there is a notion that what happens to human byproduct could impact an individual. And I want to tell you another halacha, which also probably, although I can't say for certain, does not have medical substantiation, but is probably well known. We know that, what do you do with your nails when you cut them? So the halacha says that a very devout, righteous person burns their nails. Why would a person want to burn their nails, and why does that make you such a special person? So it is brought that a pregnant person could have items that are triggering to their pregnancy or damaging to their pregnancy if they step on a nail. How that works, if that works, why that works is beyond the scope of our conversation and my expertise. But suffice it to say, it was understood that a pregnant woman should not step on a human nail. Hold on. So what is the best way to make sure nobody ever comes in contact with your nails? Well, if you burn them, they're not around anymore. So why not burn them? So the answer is because there is this notion that when we destroy or can have consumed a byproduct of the human body, it could cause you to be weakened. So I believe this is a companion thought. Just like if your nails are burnt, it might cause you some kind of weakening. And so it's a sacrifice. If a person would choose to burn their nails as opposed to throw them out or sweep them away. And so there is such a notion, at least the way Rashi learns it, that a person could become weakened if an animal consumes one's blood.
Rabbi.
Hold on one second. The other interpretation before we hear a barrel is, and this is probably a more intuitive reading, I'm sure Reb Menachem and others will agree with me, is that maybe it's not the best and most nutritious thing to feed your cat. So if you care enough about your cat to provide them food, maybe buy them from the pet store, and maybe the animal needs something other than iron, so buy them normal food, be a mensch. And that would actually be an easier read, called the chosha, because it would weaken the cat. Why would you feed the cat that stuff? All right, Beryl, go ahead.
I have a question about the wood.
Okay.
If you look in the shops in Jerusalem today, it's the same wood, lahavdil, that they use to make a menorah or other things, and at the same time the crucifixes and all that. Do we have a modern problem with wood?
Only if there was a modern Asherah. So none of the stuff that you buy or any of these items come from a tree that's designated as Avodah Zarah. Hang on a second.
What about the Christmas tree?
So
I know it's not specific, it's more of a, it represents something, but.
it's a very interesting question. I'd like to punt on it for now, just because it's subject to some interesting discussion. As I mentioned, when we learned Maseches Avodah Zarah, we had a whole discussion because there are heterim, and I'm not giving you a heter here, but you might have seen people, because there is a nominal representation of Jews in the jewelry industry. I don't know if you know this, maybe you've never seen that, but there is some small representation of Jewish people in the jewelry and the diamond and precious metals industry. And you might have even encountered or gone into a friend's store, and you might have seen that on the selection of pendants, in addition to Stars of David and Chaim Yankel and Jennifer or whatever else, you might have also seen a pendant that had a symbol that was not a Jewish star. It was a symbol of another faith. And so the question is, can a Jew sell that cross, or is that considered benefiting? And then the question is, can you sell a tree? And is there a difference before the tree was designated as a tree and after the tree? Is there a difference which denomination you're dealing with? Is it a difference if you come from Russia, where it had nothing to do with religion, right? Which is why in Eretz Yisrael, since the 90s, there's a growing market for winter trees. And as an American yeshiva boy, I was utterly horrified to be in the Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv, the central. And if you go downstairs in the winter, the whole entire basement of the Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv is essentially one big tree store. And I couldn't believe that in Eretz Yisrael they're selling trees. And what I learned soon thereafter, again, this is not giving heter that we should put a tree if you don't have a tree, but that people of Russian extraction, there was no religious association. Certainly the way they related to the tree, it was something that they did. It was minig, it was a minhag that was, and so that's my lengthy punt. I don't want to get into the specifics of.
Actually, in Russia, it was never called a Christmas tree. But the name of those trees was a New Year tree, and it was erected not for Christmas, but for a New Year day. So that's correct what you said about the lack of religious significance.
Right. Now, it's possible that if we'll study the history of the tree, we might find that once upon a time, there's a very direct correlation to something very religious. And I wouldn't even be shocked if it predates Christianity for that matter. And maybe there is some kind of association with that. But because it's not immediate and it's not what a person has, so therefore it's complicated, and I certainly don't intend to give a position in the moment. Suffice it to say, before you buy a Christmas tree or before you open a farm, consult your competent local Orthodox rabbi in the capacity of giving a halachic psak, and then you can go ahead and do whatever he tells you to do. And if you have an actionable question, you're welcome to reach out to me privately, and I can try to assist you in navigating it. But suffice it to say, an Asherah tree, which, by the way, in those days, people knew really well if it was an Asherah tree. There was specific parameters and what it looked like and how it was used and what it was designated. So that's absolutely not useful. So again, just keep on the chosh. Oh, so this line, different Rashi and many commentators say what I first explained, which is that it causes weakness to the individual whose blood it is. There's an alternative interpretation which says that it's toxic for the cat. So I Googled, is menstrual blood toxic? And so there is a study that claims that there is a certain degree of toxicity, but most of the Google searches tell you that there is no associated toxicity. And but this is what the Gemara says. All right, let's go a little further. So again, kol kosher, we were trying very emphatically to exclude something which is not kosher latzniya. It's not appropriate to keep around. So although what we meant is a thing a person keeps, but the phrasing is very strong, very vigorous. So what is it? What is it excluding? Two opinions: blood or the asher. Now the Gemara continues, and this is going to address some of our questions that we have. Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina. Yosi bar Chanina commented, "Hi, our Mishnah." Or, in the words of Rashi, this of the Mishnah. Let's read Rashi. The Tana, where our Mishnah says, Kol kosher latzniya, anything that is appropriate to be preserved, stored, of significance. V'yesh bo shiur shiroi b'nei adam asuyim latzniya, and it has the volume that most people would save. Kishiur hazeh chayiv kol adam al haitzasai. For this amount, everyone is chayiv. V'afilu adam ashir she'ein shiur zeh chashav lai. Dr. Hammer, you were the one that talked about the diamond in the pocket?
Yes.
Oh, so Rashi here summarizes our Mishnah clearly to say that even if you just bought that pink diamond for $400 million, and to you a little speck of a diamond that's only worth being, how do you call it? What do you call it? Diamond
Chip.
Chip.
Diamond dust.
Diamond dust. Even if to you it is like dust, you won't even give it as a gift. You'll throw it on the floor. Well, our Mishnah, based on the reading that says Kol kosher latzniya, v'yesh bo shir shiroi b'nei adam latzniya, and it's what the average person will do. Well, then we're not going to allow your kavanah to override the standard. That's what our Mishnah seems to indicate. Again, this was also the professor's question in the beginning of the Gemara. See the words afilu adam asher she'ein shiur zeh chashav. A wealthy person has a high standard. He's not going to put away a spoonful of coffee. It needs to be a case of coffee to be worth saving. I don't know. We don't allow your lifestyle or your attitude to affect the laws of Shabbos. This is a standard item that a person would value, and you shouldn't carry it. But Rabbi Shimon doesn't agree. The law of Rabbi Shimon. This is not like what Rabbi Shimon says. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with our Mishnah. The Ikar Rabbi Shimon, you know what Rabbi Shimon says? Ha'amar lo'amru kol ha'shiurim halalu, all of the measurements that are going to be brought in a moment, which are reflective of a standard, elo lematzni ehem, are only for those who actually keep these items or value these items. And so, Rebero, you asked it in one way. You asked, is there a subjective determination? The professor asked, do we consider the person's individual relationship to the item to devalue something? Our Mishnah, it seems to say no. Rabbi Shimon says it's all about what you actually value. So Rabbi Shimon takes much more of a case-by-case approach. Amru urim halalu elo lematzni ehem. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation. Only stated the fixed measurements for items carried out with regards to those who store them. I don't think we mean literally those who store them. Only one who stores those items is liable for carrying them. However, one who does not store the items and for whom it is insignificant, it is not liable even if the item met the measurement for liability delineated in the Mishnah. my understanding here is I'm not comfortable because let's say not everybody has a big storage, but if you were to be given a thing of coffee, you would use it, you would value it, not to keep on going back to the coffee, or a tea bag. So I don't know if it means you have storage or it's something that you would actually appreciate. I believe that's what it means, Lamatzli Ayam.
I don't know what the Hebrew term for loosey-goosey is, but that's the kind of atmosphere we're in.
Please, I don't know what loosey-goosey is, so please translate. At least give me a Rashi's commentary. What's
Slippery slope. How's that? That's better.
so? What do you mean? Explain the question now. Now, okay. A barrel.
I think what he means.
You're asking me. No, that there's that is a wide difference. First of all, there's another issue involved on a human basis. Are you from a big family or are you a single person?
And that's what we're saying. Basically, every person has
all
their
kinds of things. Ramifications.
Basically, Rebel, if you're carrying something because you want it, you shouldn't be carrying it. That's really that's the metric. If you're totally uninterested in it, well, you still shouldn't carry it, but you probably don't even notice you're carrying it because it's unimportant. Let me ask you a question, a dollar bill. Could anybody say I'm so uninterested in a dollar bill that I don't store these things?
Excuse me, we don't have dollar bills anymore in Canada.
What do we have? Coins?
Coins.
Okay, a loonie.
A loonie and a toonie.
Anyways, okay, so with that, so that's the point. Our Mishnah is much more comfortable with standardized, a standard table that helps us define if something is of value or not. The only thing the Mishnah will say is you could make something unvaluable and consider it valuable too. So our Mishnah, in a sense, is very inclusive and machmir to make an item considered carrying. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, we're not going to put, it's not considered a chatos worthy. It's not considered a biblical transgression unless you actually wanted that item. Because if you carried it, but you could care less about it, well, then that's not really carrying with intent, desire, significance, right? And so that's essentially the difference between our Mishnah and our Mishnah. Let's do one more little segment of the Gemara to get us onto page 76a, so that what I posted today won't be false advertisement. I think I posted on the link that we're 76a. Our Mishnah then continues and says, something that is not fit for storage. Again, very emphatic and strong language. It could have just said, davar she'enoi kosher latzniya. What's the chol davar? Chol she'en. Amar Elazar now comments, our Mishnah uses this language to exclude another opinion. The law Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. This is to negate the opinion of Shimon ben Elazar. What does Shimon ben Elazar teach? The Tanya. Klal Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Here's what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar taught. Kol she'enoi kosher latzniya. Something that is not enough to be worth storing. V'ein matzniyin kamayu, and we don't store such an item. V'hochshar lezeh v'hitzniya. But for this person, it became deemed worthy. And you actually stored it. This is the professor's other question. And another person came around and carried the very item that to you, it is chashuv, it's worth storing. They found Rabbi Menachem's quarter teaspoon of coffee. And they went into his pantry and they took it out. Now, Mr. B is chayiv by virtue of the interest of Mr. A. So now, that's exactly the professor's question. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, you are chayiv for such an item. Our Mishnah says, no way. Because carrying is what you're interested in. It's what you're doing. All we're going to look at is your action and your value of the item you are carrying. Let's see, Rashi. Amar Rabbi Elazar, diktani masnis. This that our Mishnah states, the einoi kosher leatzniya v'atzniya acher hu mischayev al etzasei v'chol adam p'turim. Look, Basically, our Mishnah looks into the mind and hearts of the individual, and someone else cannot break the standard to make you chayav. So although our Mishnah, generally speaking, is more machmir, it's more machmir in that even if you're uninterested in an item, if it's considered an industry standard, it's a dollar bill or a loonie, or if it's considered a standard item that a person values, you cannot get out of it. You shouldn't carry it. But something that's not typically carried, just because there's one person that likes very watery coffee or very concerned about not letting anything go to waste, that's not going to make you chayiv for carrying something that was otherwise not a problem. And this, my dear friends, concludes our Mishnah. And what I like about this Mishnah was a short Mishnah, but it showed us how attuned we are to the Gemara style, and also how the Gemara is addressing questions that, if you think about, are highly logical and able to be anticipated. And so I think this was a very interesting exercise. So I want to thank everyone for participating, and those who gave us ideas and those who we picked on, and so on and so forth. I want to thank everybody for your participation in this Mishnah. And tomorrow we're going to start the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to be the list of the actual standard amounts for certain items. And we'll get a sense of what were the things that a person was most likely to carry 2,000 years ago. Dr. Hammer, yes.
Just a question, grammatic, lahatznia, is the Dorish the same as sanua?
Yes, tznius means...
Makes sense, which, because you're hiding your accomplishments and your whatever. So that's a good, interesting.
So here we're translating, Rabbi Steinsaltz is translating for us that lahatznia means that you store it. I think it means you keep it. You want to hold on to it. You want to save it. All right, for those of you that don't drink coffee, thank you for putting up with a lot of coffee today. And we should have a wonderful day, a Gemar Chasima Toiva, and look forward to Ezer Hashem to see everyone Gesund Heit and Freilich Heit tomorrow, same time, same link. Thank you all very, very much.
Shikoyach, Gemar. Stay healthy, everybody.
Me too.
Stay loosey goosey.
Stay lucid. Stay lucid. All right, take care.